Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim Defede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim Defede. By now, many of you have probably seen or at least heard about this video showing two Miami Beach police detectives showing up at the home of Raquel Pacheco, a former state Senate candidate and community activist who had written a critical post on Facebook about Miami Beach Mayor Steve Miner.
Is that your account?
I refuse to answer questions without my lawyer present, so I really don't know how to answer that question either way.
Like I said, you're not going to jail.
This is freedom of speech. This is America, right?
And I agree with you 100%.
Okay.
Now, at that point, you would have thought the detectives would have backed off. After all, she made it clear she didn't want to answer their questions, and she invoked her right to have an attorney present. But they pressed forward anyway, with one of the detectives reading her Facebook post to her.
Verbatim, it says, the guy who consistently calls for the death of all Palestinians tried to shut down a theater for showing a movie that hurt his feelings and refuses to stand up for the LGBTQ community in any way. Even leaves the room when they vote and on related matters. Wants you to know that you're all welcome. Clown face, clown face, clown face. 3 days ago.
So you don't know if it was you?
I'm not going to answer whether that's me or not.
One of the detectives then warned her that her post could incite others to violence, and she should refrain from posting things like that in the future. The Miami Herald reported the instruction to send police to Pacheco's home came from the mayor's office. But the police chief last week said it was his decision and his decision alone. But as you will hear in a moment, Pacheco isn't buying it. This story has garnered international attention. And when I spoke to Pacheco, I started by asking if she was surprised by the reaction to her video.
I'm very surprised. I'm shocked actually by just how the story has grown legs and taken over. It's made national news and global news, and the reaction from the public is just, overwhelmingly positive, I have to say. It gives me hope.
Talk about that. When you say it gives you hope, why?
Because it's a perfect example of Americans coming together around one issue we can all get behind, which is freedom of speech, the First Amendment, the Constitution. And it's amazing to see people from all different types of political backgrounds, including, extreme GOP MAGAs, reaching out to me personally and saying, hey, I don't agree with you on anything, but on this, I'm with you. So it gives me hope in the sense that it's really good to see Americans just get down to our core values and stand together on issues that really matter. So this gives me a lot of hope for our future.
I mean, but it's got to be tricky waters to navigate for you as well. I know that Laura Loomer has been advocating. I don't know if she reached out. I think James Fishback, who's fairly radical, has reached out. How are you dealing with that when you suddenly find yourself with some folks on the far right who are pretty extreme offering their support to you?
It's tough to navigate. I'm not going to pretend that it's easy because it's a lot to weed through, and I don't have a media team, so I'm doing this all on my own. But I'm pretty adamant about researching people's backgrounds and making sure that I'm not affiliating with people who I don't align with. And the one distinction I make with those folks who do reach out, like Mr. Fishback, is that although we can stand together on this particular issue, there's absolutely nothing else that I align with in terms of his platform. And in fact, he invited me to go up to Tallahassee to do a press conference with him, and I turned it down politely because there's just nothing about his platform that I can morally, politically, or personally align with. So my message is very clear, to these folks, is that please don't conflate my criticism for the Israeli government with any ill feelings towards Jewish people, because I don't harbor those.
I know that the Miami Herald initially reported that the visit came after some contact between the mayor's office and the police chief. The police chief on Miami Beach now denies that. He says that it was his decision and his decision alone to send those detectives, those officers to your door. Do you believe that? Do you believe the chief is being truthful here, that it was completely on him?
I don't believe it, because the initial report came directly from the police department, and it was very clear. The Miami Herald reported on it that the directive came from the mayor's office in the form of an email. We have made a records request for that email, and we have nothing.
They haven't fulfilled your public records request.
They have not.
They haven't responded yet. Okay.
No.
And you're pursuing this, and I know that you have an attorney and are thinking of trying to bring on additional attorneys or bring on a firm to sort of help you. Is the goal here to try to get to the bottom of what took place? What are you hoping to achieve by potentially, I would assume, maybe filing litigation or something along that line? What's your goal here?
Look, the most important thing that I'm looking for is an investigation. I want an investigation to find out if this is a common practice at City Hall, if it's routine for them to peruse Facebook posts and then send out the police knocking on people's doors. I'd like to know how many other doors they've knocked on, or if this is just a one-off here with me, and if I'm just being personally targeted. Additionally, I'd like to see, some legislation put into effect to ensure that these things don't happen to other residents in our city. And lastly, I want to ensure that the police department, who is now accepting full responsibility, or is undergoes the proper training on First Amendment rights and protections, because it appears that they're in need of that.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure which is worse, having the police chief just sort of accept responsibility and to have a police chief who thinks it's okay to send officers to somebody's door because of a Facebook post. That's almost more scary, that the chief law enforcement officer in the city of Miami Beach thinks that that's routine and something he should do.
It's very concerning. It's very concerning that the police chief would act in this manner. I feel confident that our investigation is going to reveal that it was not he who made that decision, and that the directive did in fact come from the mayor's office. And I'm confident that there were other parties involved as well.
I want to go back to the premise that the city of Miami Beach police used to come to your door, which was that your post could be inflammatory and could incite violence against others. How do you respond to that allegation?
It's absolutely false. There's no rational person who can read that statement and walk away from it saying, yes, it incites violence. It absolutely does not incite violence. I've been a vocal critic of this mayor from the time he was elected, starting with his extreme anti-camping ordinances and then evicting people who lived on their boats from the ocean. And it's just been a series like egregious, what I feel like are abuses of power. So I've been very vocal in my criticism. And I've said harsh things before. None of them incite violence of any type. And honestly, Jim, I'm of the opinion that if anyone has incited violence, it is them towards me, because they put a target on my back. They came to my door and labeled me a potential risk to the Jewish community. That is insane. I don't even know what to do with that. It's not just damaging to my character and to my soul as a human being, but also to my safety and my son's safety. I have a 12-year-old son. We live here. And there are some extremists in our community. We saw what happened last year with that gentleman who emptied 17 bullets into a car on 41st Street because he thought there were 2 Palestinians in it. So, I mean, these things, I know I sound a little bit paranoid, but I don't think I'm not thinking I'm being irrational and thinking that now I'm very susceptible to that type of behavior from people extremists that live here that may actually be triggered by this accusation against me.
Well, let me give you a moment. What is your position as it relates to, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, we're talking about Israel. One thing you did say in the Facebook post, the guy who, referring to the mayor, the guy who consistently calls for the death of all Palestinians, tried to shut down a theater for showing a movie that hurt his feelings and refuses to stand up for the LGBTQ community in any way, even leaves the room when they vote on related matters, wants you to know that you're all welcome here, and then you put 3 clown emojis. The very first part of that sentence, the guy who consistently calls for the death of all Palestinians, to be fair, I don't think he's ever explicitly said death to all Palestinians. He's expressed support for what the state of Israel has done when it comes to Gaza, but I don't think, unless you have other evidence, that he's explicitly called for the death of all Palestinians.
Look, whether he explicitly said that or not, to me, it's neither here nor there, because it's my interpretation of the things I've heard him say over the last couple of years on the dais. He's facing a lawsuit from JVP for shutting off their microphones. He has established free speech zones within our city. And I like to remind Mr. Minor, if you're watching this, the entire United States is a free speech zone. So we don't need your little fences to tell us where we can stand. He's done egregious acts. He said egregious things to members of our Jewish community, calling them anti-Semitic for simply standing up to him and having different opinions. So that's my interpretation of it. I feel that if you have blind support for the state of Israel and the actions, I mean, this is not my opinion. This is on the world stage. They are facing these charges. Netanyahu is an accused war criminal. I'm not making this up. So that's my interpretation. If you choose to stand in a room with Bibi Netanyahu and take photos with him, which our mayor did, and you are, adamant about expressing your unwavering and blind support for the state of Israel, despite what we're seeing, in my personal opinion, that's what you're calling for.
And the notion that for stating your personal opinion, you get a visit from police, that's where the line gets crossed. That's where the line gets crossed. Because even though I disagree with Mr. Minor on that particular issue, I would still defend his right to voice his opinion. And so I expect the same in return. I'm a veteran. I served this country for 6 years, and I came from a country that was very oppressive. I grew up in Portugal, where I remember the teachers in school would still hit us. They would still hit the kids if we didn't get the answers right. And when I came to the United States, the first thing that stood out to me was when I walked into that 5th grade classroom and kids were talking back to their teachers. That to me was just so foreign. Like, we would never think to do that in Portugal. But at the same time, it was also the first taste I had of American freedom, where it was like, oh my God, even as a child, I have a voice. And so that's what resonates the most with me as I reflect back to the time I immigrated here as a 10, almost 11-year-old child. And so this notion that I would say something, and the cops, 2 armed police officers, sworn police officers with guns, would show up at my door to verify if it's me. And it just felt like, wow, I keep saying it, but it felt like the First Amendment as I know it and democracy as I know it just died at my front door that day. It just, and the initial reaction for me was just shock. And then I was very angry. And then I spent the whole night crying. I was extremely emotional. It felt like a death, Jim. It felt like a death. It still does. When we come back, we talk to former Republican State Senator Jeff Brandes about why the governor refuses to actually produce a plan to do something about property taxes. Stay with us. Welcome back. Jeff Brandes served in the Florida Senate and is now the president of the Florida Policy Project. I wanted to speak to him about the fact that Governor Ron DeSantis has been talking about a plan to eliminate property taxes for more than a year, but he still hasn't presented anything to lawmakers.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to find that the governor has not yet proposed anything in writing, right? And that he's not put out a plan. He's not shown us the research. It's like the math doesn't work, and so he doesn't want to tell us this. This is the big challenge I think that legislators are grappling with is you've told us you want to get rid of property taxes totally. Then you've proposed $1,000 credit last year for property taxes, and then you've proposed, this thing has evolved 3 or 4 different times, so nobody even really knows what the target is. I think the governor has fired this bullet, and his staff is desperately trying to move the target in front of where his bullet has fired. And I think at the end of the day, the legislature really just needs to get its arms around, like, what is the scope of this? We don't know how 400 cities and 67 counties are going to react to this. They're all going to react differently. They all have different homestead levels of participation. And for some of them, it'll bankrupt them. And the governor has acknowledged this and had said, well, we'll just backfill it. But backfill it with what? The state is looking to run a multi-billion-dollar deficit over the next 2 years. So at the end of the day, I'm struggling to see how this is not the largest taking of home rule that we've ever seen in the history of Florida, because ultimately cities and counties are going to have to go to the state to get their budget approved.
The issue of not having a plan, you said something at the beginning of your answer, which I just want to highlight and go back to. Once you put numbers on paper, once you actually have a proposal, once you actually say, this is what I want to do, and this is how much money it's going to end up saving individuals, but also what it's going to cost those individuals, cities and counties. And once you start doing all that math, then it becomes real, and the effects of it become a lot more tangible, and there can be pushback.
Absolutely. At that point, you'll actually know what you're talking about. Right now, look, he has said everything from, I don't want you to have to pay rent on your house, but if you take out all of the taxes, including the school tax, right? Most of the proposals keep the school tax. So people are still renting their homes from the government. I just don't understand what, in his mind, a win is. And so at the end of the day, he needs to put out his own plan. He has thousands of people working for him. He's had over a year. He has stumped this all over the state. Why is it so difficult to put it in writing? Why isn't it so difficult to show your work? It makes no sense. And I think it's because as soon as he puts a plan out, it's a target that people will go after. And as long as he's talking about the hypotheticals, he doesn't have to really talk about the specifics.
He likes the headline. He doesn't like the actual work that has to be done.
This is a bumper sticker. This is not a plan. This is not a proposal. It's a bumper sticker. It is a random musing at this juncture. It's not a full policy proposal. We're talking about kind of changing the foundation of the tax system of the state of Florida. You would think that when you're going to modify a foundation, you would need an engineering study. We have no studies. We are doing this on a vibe. This is a pipe dream right now. Show us your work.
It seems to me that where we are probably ultimately heading is probably something on the ballot in November that perhaps increases property taxes or eliminates homesteaded property taxes, excluding education for seniors 65 and older, and maybe some incentives for first-time home buyers to make it easier for them to buy a home. Go ahead, jump in.
Joe, I think what you're discussing is the problem that got us here. We have a patchwork quilt that we have built over generations of homesteaded property tax, and we've tried to squeeze the balloon in different ways. What you need is something that is a full-scale overhaul of the Florida property tax system. And that requires deep thought, something that you're not going to get done in a special session, that really needs research, reports, and backing to do it. But as we keep carving out these little special exceptions for all these different groups, it just adds one more patch to the quilt. And frankly, the quilt isn't working well for people. Listen, the people who aren't complaining about property taxes are the people who've lived in their home for 20 years. The people who are desperate in complaining about their property taxes are the people who bought in 2003, 2004, and are getting the full weight of the property tax. When you live next to somebody who's paying $2,000 and you're paying $10,000 in property tax, that's what's going on here in the state. And those are the people who are screaming the loudest. The people who've lived here for 20 years, you never hear a peep from them about property taxes.
What you do hear from them often is dealing with insurance and windstorm insurance, auto insurance, all the different versions of insurance in the state of Florida. We've seen insurance reform, or what they described as insurance reform. The governor and others have argued that we are now at a stabilized period, maybe even rates coming down slightly. Where do you see the insurance issue? And I don't get the sense, to be honest with you, that there's much appetite to do anything this session when it comes to insurance.
Well, I tend to agree with you. I don't think they're going to do anything major, but I don't think they need to do anything major. Let's just take one data point, which is the size and scope of Citizens property insurance. 2 years ago, when we had this conversation, Citizens was sitting at 1.4 million policies. 1.4 million policies representing about $500 billion of risk on their books. They're now down to and at that time, they only had $10 billion of cash. Now they're down to 370,000 policies. So on the one metric that to me matters the most, the size and scope of Citizens is as low as it's been in 2 decades, which is pretty incredible that has occurred in the last 24 months. In addition, you've had 17 new companies start since in the last 36 months. This is, we really rarely see these times in history where Florida has seen this much growth in new companies and this kind of reduction in Citizens. I think Citizens and their governor's office is actually surprised at how robust the market has been in attracting new companies. What we need now is a period of stability. We need to let the prices adjust. We didn't have any storms in 2025. Reinsurance prices which insurance companies are required to buy for Bermuda and London, are falling like a rock. And that should play out in pricing over time. These companies, if they want to grow, they've got to get competitive with their policies. They've got to add more features to their policies, and they've got to bring their price down or at least be competitive in pricing. This is what we've seen. And they've got to put their service up on the back end. They've got to be able to resolve claims quickly. So I think the best thing the legislature could do is let it have another year. But there is nothing the legislature is going to mandate that is going to bring pricing down.
You know, you talk about, 17 new companies being formed in the state of Florida to sort of offer insurance packages. You're actually involved in one of those. Talk to me a little bit about why you decided to get into the insurance game here in Florida and have a company of your own that's dealing with some of these things.
Well, in my time in the legislature, I learned a ton about the property insurance space, and I made some great relationships. And so I thought that if we brought the right people together, the top talent in the state that I could find together, that this was the right time to launch an insurance company in Florida. Obviously, I was not the only person to have that idea. You have 16 other companies besides mine that have launched as well. But we think that now is the time. We think that the market is stabilized, that the litigation, which was the plague on Florida, has subsided substantially, and that it was time to get into this business and launch a company. And we thought that the right place to do it was Florida. That it's a growing state. It's a state where we know what the risks really look like on a hurricane basis, and we could attract really top talent.
You talked before, you mentioned just briefly about tort reform and bringing down the number of lawsuits that have been filed. And Florida had led all states. I think 80% of the litigation against property insurance companies were out of Florida. So nobody disagrees with the idea that there was a need for tort reform. But I do hear a concern that maybe it went too far, and it has created a system that virtually bars individuals from being able to take their insurance companies to court if they believe that they are not being treated fairly. Do you think
it's
that
important to recognize?
Wait, let me just finish the question. Do you think that it went too far, and do you see that there is some movement to sort of bring back at least some level of rights for the homeowners to be able to sue?
Well, look, what Florida did was join 49 other states in having the exact same way that you would resolve these cases in 49 other states. So did we go too far by joining the 49 other states? Because Florida was the radical outlier with one-way attorney's fees. Now, the trial bar wants nothing more than to insert themselves back into the litigation factory of property insurance. And so they would love to do that. And they have members that are constantly pushing that and calling for that. The simple truth is that would be a disaster for the Florida market. If you want to see things transition right back to rising rates and failing companies, that's the pathway back there. But look, this has only been on the books for 3 years now. And what we've seen is the radical success, the reduction in citizens, the lowering of risk for Floridians, the increase in private companies. So listen, if you believe in capitalism and how that letting markets work, the best thing we can do is not turn back to the insanity that was the insurance market of Florida from 2018 to 2022.
We'll be right back. Before we go, a quick programming note. Starting next Sunday, Facing South Florida moves to 11:30 a.m. Again, that's 11:30 a.m. right here on CBS. Finally, if you have any thoughts or comments about today's show, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.